Welcome back to another video. So this video is episode 2 of my off season, and I've kind of structured this one a little bit differently. So this video, as you can see from the title, is all about the squat. I filmed the first half in the home gym and I addressed my own setup when I squat. I talked through squatting as someone that gets quite bad wrist pain. I talked through elbow positioning on the squat and linked in with that solid bracing when it comes to squatting as well. Once I've played all that, I also want to go through why I've made the decision to switch from squatting in heels to squatting in flats. So let's just jump straight in. Let's go to my session in the home gym and look through what I want to explain on that front. So I have finished warming up, so just getting my sleeves on, as you can see. Once I've done that, I'm literally just going to get under the bar. I start at 70 and then I will jump to 120. My top set today is a top set of 5 at 140. So I will literally do 70, 120, straight to 140. And then I also have a fatigue single after, which should be at 155, providing everything feels good. And that should all be around an RP6. So it's only week 2 of the block. It's a very, very light week still. Just got to make sure I execute and focus on kind of solid execution on every single rep to make sure it is moving at the RP that it's supposed to, kind of thing. So that's the plan for today. I will show you how I get on with my working sets. I'm not going to talk through my working sets. I want to just crack on and focus with those. But obviously I will break down my setup for you in a moment when I get under the bar. Training is going really well. Squats especially, I'm really excited with at the moment. So I am no longer squatting in heels. I'm now squatting in flats. And what I'm going to do is, after I've shown my setup and that side of things, I will also put in a clip talking through more of why I've decided to make the switch to flats from heels and kind of how that's going for me as well. So I'm just going to end this bit here, jump straight in, and I will start talking through my setup. Okay, so I'm just going to break down my own setup. This isn't going to be too much detail. I'm not going to go through every single step. I just want to break down how I get under the bar and how I get that bar in a solid position as someone that, one, gets really bad wrist pain, and also someone that struggles with keeping the bar in position on their back, or I did up until quite recently. So that's something I think this new way of gripping the bar has definitely helped me. And the only way I can really describe how I now grip the bar for squats is wedging myself into the bar, which, rather than creating a shelf, which I don't think has ever really worked for me, this method has made the bar feel a lot lighter on my back and just a lot more solid. Like, it feels like the bar is essentially just part of me as I do the lift. It's not going to go anywhere. There's no doubt about it. Like, it is solid on my back and it's worked really well for me. So what I do is I have my grip roughly a thumb's length in from the knurling. So obviously that's going to vary from person to person, like depending on your shoulder mobility, depending on how broad you are, loads of different things. Grip the bar where it feels comfortable for yourself. The only thing is, if you go too wide, if you're not like a super heavy or have really bad shoulder issues, if you go too wide, the bar isn't probably going to feel as stable on your back. And if you go too narrow, you're probably going to struggle to get that ribs down position that you need for bracing. It depends from person to person. Like, there's a lot of, especially female lifters, do squat with a really narrow grip. And I did up until recently, and the ribs down thing wasn't ever an issue for myself. But I do think a lot of lifters potentially then struggle with getting that good solid bracing position if they go too narrow. So for most people, you probably want to be somewhere between the two. So I start people off by saying roughly shoulder width apart, if not slightly wider, and then it's a case of adjusting as they go. Completely depends, but that's what I do for people when I first teach them to squat. Okay, so the only other thing I do also want to say before I show exactly how I get under the bar is, I think a lot of people also, and this isn't anything that happens to really experienced lifters, it's more of a newbie kind of thing. A lot of people, when they're trying to maybe create the shelf effect, they think that means they need their elbows to be back. Now, the problem is, if your elbows are back, that bar is more likely to roll up your back, which is a really common issue that a lot of newer lifters have. But also, you're not going to have any tightness in your chest. And squats, you need to think of as a full body movement. Like, every part of your body needs to be in a solid, stable position. If you've got absolutely no chest tightness, as you struggle on a rep and you start coming up, if your elbows are already here at the bottom, that's just going to cause more of a problem, and that's when people are going to fail overhead. So one thing I also want to kind of mention, not necessarily to cue elbows down, but try not keep them back behind you. Like, I personally do think of the cue elbows down when I'm first setting up under the bar, and that's only really since I've changed the way I grip the bar, just as a little mental cue, just to keep everything solid and in position. But
it's just something I think people need to be aware of. If your elbows are back and you're lacking that tightness in your chest, you are more likely to have that bar roll up your back, which when you get to obviously maximal loads is when you're more likely to almost fail and have to dump it overhead, which is obviously something you want to avoid as much as possible. So that being said, let me break down myself getting under the bar. I will probably sound incredibly out of breath as I'm doing this. So basically, all I do is I set my hands how wide I like to have them. So for myself, that is roughly a thumb's length in from the knurling. And I am pushing into the bar with this bottom bit of my palm the entire time. So I have my hands there, I set them in, and I make sure I'm obviously central and lined up to the bar. I am forcing my hands into the bar the entire time I am setting my position. So this entire time I will be forcing my hands into the bar. I will come under and I will find that sweet spot on my back of where I like to have the bar. And that will obviously vary from person to person and can take time to work out if you are a newer lifter. But once you know where you like to have the bar, you kind of just learn and it becomes a routine. So I have that bar locked in on my back now. So I'm still pushing the bar with my hands forwards and my back is almost pushing into the bar. So between the two, my hand is pushing into the bar, my back is pushing into the bar, and that creates that wedge where I am literally at one with the bar. So I'm going to go through that again. So I'm going to go under, pushing into the bar with my hands. My back also is pushing into the bar, and they are both kind of squeezing into the bar, which creates a really solid wedge. Then I'm just going to brace, pop up, and I would obviously hold my brace as I do the walkout, but because I'm talking, I can't. And then 2 to 3 steps on the walkout. And then you want to just brace. And as I'm doing that, I'm still forcing the bar into my back and my back into the bar. And then just down, up, and back in the rack. So obviously that doesn't cover everything, but the main thing I think I want people to take away is the bar should feel like it is literally part of you, like it's not going anywhere. You want to find that way for yourself that just keeps that bar in a really solid, strong position. That's going to be it for this part of the video. I will break down why I have switched to flats later on.
Okay, so as my squats from my Saturday session are playing through, I thought I would just talk through in a little bit more detail the elbows down or elbows forward cue that I mentioned when filming my setup. So a lot of people think that in order to create a shelf for the bar to rest on, they need to have their elbows out behind them and more squeezed together, but this is actually the opposite of what we're after. By having our elbows out behind us, it puts us in a much worse position for an effective brace because it will automatically put our rib cage in a more flared position, which is something that we want to avoid. So by that I mean our chest is essentially up rather than condensed down facing our pelvis. Another issue that people will often have as well if they are squatting with a more flared rib cage position is that their hip flexors may get more of a pinching sensation and quite a bit of pain in them, and they also will probably struggle to hit depth. And this is just due to not being in a stacked position. So the cue of elbows down rather than out behind essentially just puts us in that stacked position that we're after. So by a stacked position, I essentially just mean your rib cage should be directly over your pelvis, and you need that positioning for a solid brace. The ribs down cue is one that I use often with newer lifters or people that are struggling to get a solid brace because it reminds them and teaches them how to get in that more stacked position. So your ribs are down, they are pointing down towards your pelvis, and that's what you need to think of. So when we have our elbows down or forwards, whatever you want to think of it as, it automatically puts us in a more stacked position. It forces us into that position. It's much harder to flare your rib cage when you have your elbows down and forwards. So that's why I really like the cue of elbows down. And by having this more stacked position as well, not only does it help with a more effective brace, but it also helps with maintaining that pressure over midfoot that we are aiming for when squatting, because it will cause a lot less deviation in the bar path and it will just create a more consistent and fluid squat overall. So that is why I quite like the elbows down or forward cue, and it may be something that can help your squat.
From the mud, I just need attraction. Started with a buck, now I tell the label match it. Yeah, I've been my own boss. I took that leap of faith, yeah, I really do.
Okay, so hopefully that all made sense. And if you have any questions, feel free to either comment them or drop me a message. My Instagram and my email are both in the description down below. So if you have any questions about that or anything else I'm going to talk about in any of my videos, please do just get in touch. It's absolutely fine. The other thing I want to talk about then is why I am now squatting in flats. And to address that, I think I should also mention why I first switched to heels. There's a lot of different reasons why people switch between the two. And a lot of people do regularly switch between the two as well. Like, in all honesty, even back when I was a junior, I used to switch quite a lot. Maybe twice a year I would switch from one to the other. These days I'm trying to find exactly what works best for me. And the reason I initially switched back to squatting in heels was basically just so that I could squat more narrow. So I will insert a video up above, but I struggle so much with knee cave when I squat too wide. And I don't necessarily mean too wide as a bad thing, because it is a stable position for me. And I've always felt quite solid with my feet a little bit wider. However, I get such bad knee cave that it literally turns into a poor squat. So I did some thinking, and I decided it was about a year ago now, I think, that I switched to heels. And I made the decision to switch to heels so that I could gradually bring my squat stance in and squat narrow. You may have noticed in previous videos watching me squat, I do have an incredibly narrow stance when I'm squatting in heels. And that was basically to eliminate the knee cave issue, because my knees are already in that solid position. They then can't come in any further. And I've never worried too much about my knee cave. Like, it's never been a problem. It's literally just because I have stronger adductors and they are just taking over as I leave the whole of the squat. That's fine, and it's not something that needs to be corrected. It's not going to cause any injuries. But for me, it just didn't seem efficient, and it wasn't efficient because it was so drastic that it would literally turn my reps into a poor squat. So I made the switch to heels, and it felt incredible. The first 6-7 months especially, I felt like I had a very powerful squat, and I was incredibly happy with the fact I made that decision. Once I got used to squatting that narrow and it became comfortable and easy for me to hit depth with that, I felt like I definitely made the right choice. And then I made the decision, I think it was just after the British, so back in March, so it's probably April time, to try squatting in flats again. And that is because I found I was really struggling to maintain a good solid centre of mass. Like, I couldn't really keep my weight and positioning over my midfoot, and I felt like I was quite uneasy a lot of the time, especially on the walkout. So I did initially, after the British, run a few weeks in flats, and I tried it. But I was that was when my mental block with squats started to appear, and I felt a lot of stress because anytime I was going slightly heavier, probably around an RP 8 or above, my knee cave would come back into play and it would stress me out, and the squat just looked hideous and it annoyed me. And I remember I basically had a temper tantrum because things weren't going how I wanted them to. So that's when I made the decision to just go back into heels until All England's was done, and then I would have the time and the off season to address the switch and trial a couple of blocks in flats. So that's what I'm doing now. So the main reason I decided to switch to flats, and a massive benefit to squatting in flats, is because it is much easier to feel more stable and maintain a solid centre of mass. Your weight isn't going to shift forward onto your toes unless you're obviously squatting that much further length forward. And for me, I think squatting in heels for so many months has really helped develop my quads and more strength in that position, especially because a lot of the time I was squatting with more of a mid bar rather than a low bar when I was squatting in heels. So I think my legs and the strength in my legs has developed enough that now I'm back in flats. One, my stance is still relatively narrow considering I'm in flats. Like, if I hadn't have ever switched to heels before and worked on narrowing my stance, I don't think I would ever be able to squat as narrow in flats as I am now. And also, the way my legs have developed over the last year, squatting in heels has definitely helped me change my leverages for the better when it comes to squatting in flats. So I basically decided to squat in flats because it helps me feel 1,000 times more grounded. My walkout feels a lot stronger, a lot more solid, and I feel more confident that when it gets to those final weeks of the block, when things are getting heavy, when the RPE is higher, I think I will have a lot more confidence with my squat technique, and it will be a lot more consistent than it was in heels. Because the other thing I found with heels as well is when I got used to squatting to depth in heels, I then found it very hard to hit the right level of depth and not sink it too low and lose tension, which is something that you obviously want to avoid. You want to find that sweet spot, which I feel like I've got in flats without even having to really think about it. So that is kind of the rundown of why I've decided to switch to flats. Hopefully that is enough of an explanation and it makes sense. I'm really excited to run the next. I'm going to give myself a minimum of 2 blocks in flats just to make sure it does feel good and I'm not making any kind of rash decisions. But I also know I can switch back to heels and it won't really make much difference. Like, it won't take me a very long time to adjust. But honestly, this is the most confident I have felt in my squat in years. Like, my squat used to be my best lift, and I finally feel like I'm getting back to those days. So I am incredibly excited to see how I get on squatting in flats over the next few blocks. And I genuinely feel like I'm on the right path to hitting some really good PBs and making good progress again. So hopefully that's all made sense. Any questions, as I mentioned before, do just comment below or get in touch. That's absolutely fine. And hopefully you've enjoyed this more coaching kind of information style of video. I'll be back next week with another, and I'm not sure on the topic of it yet. I have made a plan of a few different things I want to address. So it might just be a regular week of training, it might be nutrition focused, it might be more of a coaching based video. But we will see what happens over the next week. I hope you have enjoyed this one. If you have, please like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you next week for another.
Delirious. Fall in love with the game and then you marry it. I think I married it. This the anthem. If you rockin' with it, put your